The Syrian conflict, which emerged in 2011, had quickly turned from a pro-democracy movement to a geopolitical game of chess, which is still being played by numerous actors. One of the most important outcomes of the war has been the increasing footprint of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its growing influence in the region. Iran's widening sphere of influence is seen as a threat by many Arab countries, most notably Saudi Arabia. However, Israel would be the country most affected by a dominant Iran. No country in the Middle East is doing more to contain Iran's rise than Israel. This can be seen in the regular air raids that Israel has been carrying out against targets in Syria since 2012. Iran and Israel have been engaged in a proxy war long before the Syrian civil war started. However, the Syrian conflict opened new opportunities for Iran to extend its influence in the region and gain a significant advantage over Israel. So how exactly is Iran extending its influence? Now, why is this a threat to Israel? And how has Israel responded to an ever-increasing Iranian presence in Syria? This is Beyond Borders. In this video, we will look at how the Iran-Israel proxy war has been playing out in Syria and what lies ahead for both countries. In the 1980s, Iran and Iraq fought a devastating war, which ended in a stalemate with both sides claiming victory. Yet, the damage sustained by Iran during the war was very high. Iran's armed forces were depleted and it was faced with numerous domestic challenges, including a deadly civil war, which resulted in the deaths of hundreds of top Iranian officials. However, this war would radically alter Iran's strategic thought and its foreign policy goals. The Iran-Iraq war was a very conventional war, and it had a lot of similarities with World War II. In fact, the entire conflict was characterized by large-scale trench warfare, which is basically soldiers digging up ditches as a protection from enemy fire, and this was very common in World War II. Iran realized that such conventional methods would result in heavy losses. This led Iran to embrace and perfect a unique style of asymmetric warfare, which includes the use of proxies to sow chaos in countries they deem to be a threat. Iran's proxy network has grown stronger over the years. Iran's sphere of influence extends to Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Palestinian territories, Bahrain, and Syria. In this video, we will be focusing on how Iran flexes its muscles in Syria. Iran was assisting the Assad government of Syria when the protests started in 2011 and became more entrenched in the conflict with the rise of the Islamic State. Iran has also been aiming to set up a permanent presence in Syria to act as a counter to Israeli influence in the region. Syria is a major ally of Iran, which means that if Bashar al-Assad's government were to lose power, Iran would lose influence at the expense of a greater US or Israeli presence in Syria. In order to prevent this, Iran has followed a three-pronged strategy in Syria. Firstly, Iran, along with Russia, has been supporting the Syrian government by providing training to Syrian troops and equipping them with state-of-the-art weapons. Iran has also launched missiles against rebel-held territory and against ISIS. Secondly, Iran has been funneling weapons to its proxies in the surrounding region, most notably to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran has been sending its special forces, which include the Quds Force and Basij militias, which is a part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, to train and arm local Shiite militias like the Badr brigades. This strategy of Iran has largely been successful. However, it is also seen as a major security threat by Israel. There are two crucial aspects as to why Israel sees Iranian presence in Syria as a major challenge. Firstly, and most importantly, Iran's financial and military backing of Hezbollah is the biggest challenge facing the Israeli security apparatus. According to the CSIS Missile Defense Project, Hezbollah is the world's most heavily armed non-state actor. Hezbollah is expected to possess a stockpile of around 130,000 missiles, including ballistic, anti-air, anti-tank, and anti-ship missiles. This was largely accumulated after the 2006 Lebanon war. During the war, Hezbollah had launched around 4,000 missiles into Israel. Israel fears that another conflict with Hezbollah could see missiles powerful enough to reach major cities like Tel Aviv, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Beersheba, and beyond. Hezbollah has also built a vast network of underground tunnels near Israel's border with Lebanon. Secondly, Iranian presence in Syria could increase the chances of a direct confrontation between both sides. Iran has plans to establish a permanent military presence in Syria. It has already established bases like the Imam Ali military base in the Deir ez-Zor province near Iraq, where it houses troops and missiles. Israel considers all of these as worrying trends, but Israel has not allowed these activities to slip under the radar. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed not to allow any permanent Iranian presence in Syria, and Israel has been taking preemptive action to contain Iran. As of now, Israel's major goal with regards to Iran in Syria has been to prevent it from supplying weapons to Hezbollah, as well as halt Iran's expansion in Syria. Israel has achieved this through a strategy that involves collecting intelligence on Iranian activity and responding to this through a series of preemptive airstrikes. Till now, Israel's offensive against Iranian operations in the region have been largely successful. However, the question is, how long will this game of cat and mouse continue? Iran will have to find ways to avoid Israeli airstrikes, and when this happens, what would Israel's strategy be? Iran has a strong alliance with Russia. Iran has sought to procure the S-400 missile defense system from Russia, which is one of the best air defense systems in the world. Iran would also look forward to ending the economic sanctions imposed on it by the US. An end of sanctions would mean that Iran could enter into trade deals, conduct energy operations smoothly, and it could easily gain access to freed assets. This could drastically increase its operations against Israel in Syria. Iran could also fund Hezbollah with more assets. Israel's strategy to counter Iran currently relies on three factors: diplomacy, intelligence, and defense. Diplomatically, Israel is looking to establish better relations with the Arab world. The Abraham Accords are a step in this direction. Through the Accords, Israel established formal relations with UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. The progress is expected to continue. Many expect Saudi Arabia to open formal ties with Israel, which it has been reluctant to do so far. Perhaps Israel's greatest advantage over Iran is its proximity to Syria and its ability to obtain reliable intelligence. When it comes to defense, Israel has purchased F-35 fighter jets from the US, which will make Israel's air superiority in the region even more formidable. This could also give Israel a potential advantage over the S-400 missile system if Iran were to procure it from Russia. Apart from the battle-hardened Iron Dome missile system, Israel is also working on a new and superior ballistic missile defense like the Arrow system. This Cold War of sorts between the two Middle Eastern rivals would continue, and while Iran would seek new ways to overcome Israel's intelligence and air superiority, Israel, on the other hand, would look to outmaneuver Iranian tactics in Syria through strength and diplomacy. We can expect to see more incidents in Syria and new tactics being developed by both sides. What do you think of the Iran-Israel proxy war? How do you expect the whole scenario to play out? Do share your thoughts in the comment section.